Jack Mclean, and today I'm lucky enough to have my guest is Dr. Phil Graham-Smith. We'll be discussing everything you need to know when it comes to high-performance programming and utilising the secrets of biomechanics. So make sure coaches to get your notepads out, and of course athletes as well. There'll be some real key technical models that we can discuss that you can apply to your training. If you're tuning in live, feel free to use the comment section below and text in some questions for Phil, and I'm sure we can find some time a little bit later on. But thanks for jumping on the other side of the world Wednesday night, Phil. Really appreciate your time, mate.
No problem. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to this.
Likewise, yeah. Looking forward to the chat. As I mentioned, Sam Joseph, a colleague of mine, recommended have you on when I caught up with him at the ASCA conference, and you were the top of the list. So I've done a little bit of listening with recent interviews, mate, and yeah, really looking forward to sharing your experience in sport, but also obviously with technology and in biomechanics. But I guess for the listeners that aren't aware of your background, Phil, do you mind providing us both from an academic and practical point of view some experiences you've done along the way?
Yes, yeah, sure. Background is I would find it hard to say I'm an coach, but I'm through and through biomechanist. Worked with athletics, but in particular sprints, long jump, triple jumpers, high jumpers for many years, like 30 years I think now, to be honest. And throughout that time, I found linking in with physios and S&C coaches, understanding more about their world, has helped me become a much better practitioner. I think you're in a position like a biomechanist, you can actually bring a lot of disciplines and professions together and unite that together neatly with the coach and athletes to achieve some great things. So we'll get onto that, I think, later on. But my background, I graduated at Liverpool Polytechnic back in 1992 and was fortunate enough to work then on a program with the British Athletics Federation, as it was then back in 1992. And I continued to work with them through the various iterations with UK Athletics until I left the country in 2013 when I went to Aspire Academy. But alongside all that, I was an academic. Liverpool John Moores University. Then I went over to Salford Uni. And within a few years of being at Salford Uni, I became the director, the head of department. And it was there where I was able to realize a vision of setting up one of, if not the first, S&C programs in the country. And Martin Matthews and myself, we got together, we got by the National Strength and Conditioning Association of America and became the first undergrad program that graduates could actually leave with the CSCS qualification. So S&C became quite a mainstay in my life from around about 2003. Got the CSCS, maintained that, do my CPD, all that sort of stuff. We then went on, we employed Paul Comfort, and then he took it on to the master's level. And I think most people would agree that Salford has become one of the focal points of excellence in strength and conditioning around the world now. Paul went on to do some good work with some of the younger guys there. But then in 2013, I went to Aspire Academy in Qatar. And I left there just 2 months ago, 2 months to the day, to take up a position at Manchester University as a reader in biomechanics and innovation. So 10.5 years in the desert, met some outstanding practitioners there, S&C coaches, physios, and I guess it's through them that they helped me develop. One in particular, I think it probably comes into one of your next questions, actually. Alex Natira is someone I met there. Love the guy. He fed me, basically. And I think through him, I've actually grown as a biomechanist, feeding me with the right questions. And, so having someone like that working alongside you to develop solutions and answers to coaching problems, be it athletics coaching or S&C coaching, I think is your bread and butter as an applied biomechanist. But yeah, back in the UK now, settling back into an academic role, which so far so good. Quite enjoying getting back into the classroom again.
Yeah, sure. Oh, fantastic. Yeah, great segue. So Alex is, obviously most listeners, I imagine, be familiar with Alex's work. Who else have been some sort of strong influences, mentors, if you like, over your career,
Yeah,
help influence your philosophy?
well, it has to go back really to, as I said, I'm a biomechanist through and through. And it has to be Adrian Lees, Professor Adrian Lees from Liverpool John Moores University. He's probably the man who not only gave me the opportunity after graduating at Liverpool, he gave me the skills, the competencies, the know-how of technology, force platforms, for example. We weren't using iPhones and we were using high-speed cine cameras. We were digitizing manually. It was a completely different world back then. But Adrian was a guy who fed me the skills and the competencies and gave me that opportunity to work with UK athletics back then. He was my PhD supervisor. And I guess along the way, we sort of jointly came up with the secrets of being impactful in sport. There were many similar programs in athletics, some at Manchester Met, where I am now with throwers, some at Leeds Beckett, some at Brunel, and other sports. And we were the only one really that continued way into the end of the 1990s into the 2000s of working with athletes and providing continuous support to them. So I'd always be thankful to Adrian there. And as I alluded to then, it's then the coaches that feed your practical application. They feed you the questions. So, Alex is a key example there. Other ones, people know Chris Bradner, N-Swiss, Evan, the physio, N-Swiss. These guys over at Aspire or Aspetar would be feeding the questions of, how can you assess this? What does this mean? One of the big ones that Alex gave was if I've got an athlete who can squat 100 kilos on two legs, does that mean he can squat 50 kilos on a single leg? And I said, no, it's not possible. He goes, I knew that, but why? Alex was a why man, why, but why? And I just sat down and, I think there's one of the things that, we can go and jump on the force plates and test it. I said, I don't need to do that. We can relate to fundamental biomechanical concepts, and just by simply looking at segmental mass distributions, and we created an answer straight away within half an hour. And when we did test it on the force plates, and Chris then went on to do more looking at different variations of single leg work, they were very, very close to what the segmental route gave us. So I think, getting the right people in your team, working, with a desire to help performance of an athlete, help develop performance. You get the right questions, you can filter out the nonsense, get to the point quickly, which is another factor. You've got to do it quickly. You can't put together a research program and wait 3 months for it to get ethically approved, and and then a year or two later you put a paper out and then you give your feedback. This is about understanding fundamental principles of physiology, biomechanics, S&C. If you understand those fundamentals, you can answer questions very quickly. For me, the research side of it is the icing on the cake. It's the confirmation. And I don't think really, in all honesty, in biomechanics, I don't think there's anything outlandishly new to feed into S&C. I think maybe the next thing to understand in relation to injury is recovery more than how to get people stronger and faster. I think recovery might be the next big breakthrough, which has more links with the physiologist then, I guess. But as I said, we need answers quickly. Understanding the fundamentals can get you that without actually going to the lab to do any testing. So, I had all the gadgets anyone could have in Aspire. And bottom line is I had force plates and a high-speed video camera on my phone. That covered 90% of my provision to athletes. Keep it simple. Yeah.
Yeah, simple, and like you mentioned, the time in that environment is so critical. So being able to have that access to information quickly, and a sound knowledge to be able to then give the athlete feedback then and there is pretty important. Is that something that in terms of the evolution of force decks was sort of front of mind as someone that was using force plates throughout your career? You're pretty eager to accelerate that process.
Yeah. Many years ago, as a young guy coming out of school, my dad worked at a kitchen manufacturer. He gave me a job, or he managed to get me a job in the summer, and it was working on a production line, filling boxes, packaging. And I'm thinking, this is hard work, this. Turning around, putting this in a box, then turning there, I thought, I can make my workflow a lot quicker here. And that's the same principle that came through with force decks. At squad weekends with the jumpers, I'd be doing drop jumps from 20 and 40, squat jumps, counter movement jumps, 40-meter sprint tests on the LAVEG, then doing some different tests into the sandpit, standing and long jump and various things. And I'm spending hours crunching that data in an Excel spreadsheet. And I'm thinking, how can I become more efficient? And the other side of it was going into football clubs and rugby clubs, and I'm hearing that there's not really much connection between science and medicine. We used to hear back in the early to mid 2000s, it's a medically driven program, it's a performance driven program. It wasn't simply performance in the sense of athletes need to be better physically, but they also need to be more robust. That synergy didn't exist. It was, can you do a jump test for me today? Yeah, but I did that for the physios 2 days ago. Why am I doing it again? Oh, I did it for the S&Cs. I did it for the physio. Why am I doing it again? And then you get some half-cocked jump that nobody's really interested in because they didn't perform it well. So I'm thinking, hang on a minute. These guys aren't talking. You need to do it once and do it well. So let's get the bilateral plates to look at asymmetries from a physio perspective, return to play. Add the forces together to get the performance output measures of peak power, jump height, RFD, whatever it might have been back then. So that's where force decks came about, really, is a solution to become more efficient and to help communication and be a little bit more empathetic to the players themselves. And I think force decks is something that I will always be immensely proud of. The way it's taken off globally, and a lot of credit there to my co-founder there, Dan Cohen, who did a lot of the donkey work, leg work, traveling around America, doing all the conferences, the shows, and he really was the heartbeat of it. I had the nice side of things of understanding force time curves and creating algorithms to auto detect, which made obviously help create a nice user experience, which I still believe is one of the things that make it probably the best force plate product out there. Is its user efficiency, less clicks of a button, the intuitiveness of it, if you like. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's taken off, and yeah, can understand why it'd be something you look back on and pretty proudly of. It's definitely made a
Yeah.
big impact on many listers, no doubt, now in elite sport, but also in the private practice. Being able to access technology pretty easily, not be overwhelmed from it, and how to use it, and then, like you said, be able to spend hours and hours crunching the data, but be able to apply it then and there with the athlete.
Well,
Solved a big
I
problem.
think I think what comes with that, there's a negative side to that, and maybe this is the older, dare I say, wiser guy that I've become over the years. I think we opened up force plates to a wider community. Traditionally they were the tool of the biomechanists, and over the years, and credit to Rob Newton and the system that he created prior to force decks. There was a lot of old systems hanging around in clubs, institutes around the world, particularly UK. When I was going into, and there was a force plates there sat in cupboards. They weren't being used because the expertise around processing force data wasn't there, or the confidence wasn't there. So I guess that's what we tried to create, was to sort of liberate all these these force platforms in cupboards, and people who had force plates, Kistlers, Ampties, Vertex, creating that link to run it through the force software, which essentially was the first thing. We went to create a software solution, not necessarily hardware. The hardware came at a different date. So yeah, but the downside of it is you've now got people, and not necessarily criticizing this. There's a lot of overthinking going on, creating new variables, that really aren't that valid, I'd say. And you've now got a whole ton of experts of force deck or force plate users, who I think possibly can be complexifying what they're getting out of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. What variables would spring front of mind that you've sort of picked up on over the
I
years
mean,
that perhaps are overcomplicating it?
when we were at university way back in the late 90s, we were taught by engineers and physicists, not biomechanists, sports scientists. And one of the very first sessions we had was looking at dimensions. What are units? What are they? What is the definition of a certain dimension? And when you start putting variables together, so that I think there's maybe 180 plus variables that you can get out of force decks. Not all of them are relevant, because some of it is breaking the curve down to the time at which onset of movement occurs, or the time. Those tend to be used to derive other variables like movement time, flight time. So there's a whole load of variables. But the first thing when you're looking at data, you can't just make magic numbers up. I'll just divide this by that. So one of my there's two things, I guess. One is RSI modified. I despise that metric. It's become so popular, and I don't know who came up with it. So this is not having a pop at anyone. I just don't know where it came from. Purely dimensional analysis. Jump height is in meters. Divide that by contraction time or movement time, which is seconds. Divided by second is meters per second, which is speed, velocity. That is not velocity. So a metric has been created that has got the same units as another variable, velocity, but it's not velocity. So therefore, I struggle to see how that has got so much traction in a scientific community of S&C coaches, when for me it's a flawed variable.
Yeah. So do you think because it's so accessible, it's got a little bit out of hand now, where anyone can pick it up and use it, and it's perhaps
I think
processes have been.
it, I'm all for creativity. I've got a creative mind myself, but I think what you do need is sense checks before. And I know, and again, I hate myself for saying this because I don't want to be the old guy who's criticizing the young ones. I am all for creativity, but sense checks have got to be in place, and
Yeah.
it's about just thinking of something and working it all out. Spend time to process it, reflect on it, change it, refine it before you start putting it out on social media as being the next best thing. I mean, that would be my wisdom, to the younger generation, I guess. I think what I've heard from people in the past, that the humble people who went out big time on publishing things, and nowadays the equivalent of that is probably the social media. There was one very eminent researcher who actually stood up once and said, you know what, all that stuff I did in the past as a younger academic, it was absolute nonsense. But the problem is that's a body of evidence now, or that's been used as an evidence base. And I think we can get consumed at times with evidence base when the evidence really is not that good. So that there is a word of caution there, I guess, for be creative, but please put your sense checks in. Spend time on
take
it,
your time to
reflect on it. Yeah. And again, I don't mean to be critical. I'm just the older guy now, sort of trying to instill some wisdom in these younger guys. I mean, I'll give you another
100%.
example. Isometric mid-thigh pull. We know that you can get bigger scores doing an iso squat, right? An iso mid-thigh pull has gained so much traction, and it's clear, easy to see why. You're it's a pull, it's a lift. It's like doing a deadlift, isn't it? From mid range. It's easy to administer, but the consistency of positioning is not good. You're not looking at like for like between two athletes. Their positions are very different. The bar could be nearer the hips on one, could be nearer the knee on the other. The trunk could be forward, could be upright, and you're relying on strength and energy absorption through wrists, elbows, shoulders, all the way through. But my biggest concern is when you start then using that for doing DSI, your dynamic strength index. The purest measure of DSI, the purest measure has got to be squat jump over an iso squat. No eccentric movement in a counter movement jump. No stretch shortening cycle. It's purely concentric against your isometric squat in that same position. Everything else, every other metric is contaminated in the sense of you don't know really what you're measuring. You start looking at a mid-thigh pull, as I said, it's a pull push rather than just a push. Your squat jump is just a push against the ground versus stretch shortening push. So what you're looking at, okay, you may get some nice different ranges. If it's above 0.8, it's below 0.6. You might be able to make some inferences from it. But for me, I would be saying, like when we first developed the iso squat way back in the late 90s, think it through. Don't just go latch on to counter movement and a mid-thigh pull just because everybody seems to be using them. Just think it through from the attributes that you're testing, rather than just jumping onto a bandwagon.
And for those listening in that, like you said, you get caught up with what you see on social media, and you can start to just follow that bandwagon. When going through and trying to take a more of a calculated approach, fundamentally, what would be the key areas of I guess biomechanics that we want to understand before creating your battery of tests? Do you think the key areas for people to look into?
Yeah, I mean, years ago, and this is the first thing I did in the first couple of months I went to Aspire. For me, the baseline when I went to Aspire was so low. I couldn't believe, what they were really doing. There was no sport-specific testing being done with athletes. So, when I arrived, the first thing we did was a needs analysis. We looked at each sport that we worked with, each event group in athletics, and said, what are the characteristics of this sport or this event from all aspects, holistically, biomechanics, S&C, psychology, nutrition, you name it. What's the work-rest ratios? What's the physical attributes? And from that, then we were able to hone in on what the top 10 qualities are that we're looking for. Then you create the tests that are accurate, fast, preferably you can stuff you can do and get information that you can use straight away. So that has implications on the technologies you use. And you build up this profile of attributes rather than just thinking that a counter movement jump can give you everything, which is not the case. So, I've heard, counter movement, eccentric peak velocity in a counter movement jump has been assimilated to deceleration in the change of direction task. And I'm like, oh my word, it can't be. The level and intensity of it, self-selected versus, decelerating from high speed, are not the same things. So look at what your attribute, what the characteristics are of the sport, and then find a way of measuring it in the best, safest, most accurate way possible. That would be the advice. And if it means doing a maximal strength test rather than looking at a peak force in a squat jump, you do an isometric test. Then you're looking at, well, which one's better? Is it an iso squat? Is it biodex? Isokinetics. I would still use biodex isokinetics to this day for getting good measures of eccentric quads and hamstring strength. That would be my metric. Second to that, I would then be looking at iso tests, be it iso squats, or even looking at joint positions in a Spanish squat, to get an estimation of knee joint load, rather than just doing a mid-thigh pull. Because for me, things get contaminated along the way. And if you can keep it as pure in terms of, the principles of muscle length, then, joint specific angles, I think you're going to get closer to that transfer into performance.
Yeah. So there's a bit there, but I guess the key takeaways I noted down there was, first one is that having a clear needs analysis, understanding the characteristics of the sport. Number two, you're creating an accurate and fast, reliable test with your team. So that's quite a holistic approach. Biomech, physiologists, everyone's coming together with all their different, I guess, perspectives and coming a test that you're looking at. And that makes sense, like you mentioned earlier, for the athlete's point of view. You're not doubling up and they're going through a process where they feel like no one's talking, everyone's on the same page, and everyone's getting what they need. And it's concise for the athlete. And then three, then you're ultimately getting a profile of attributes that you're designing your program from. And then when you're looking at those so tests, so it is specific, like you mentioned, the example of counter movement and comparing that to a deceleration and how the intensities are way off. For a quick and accurate test, are you prioritizing, I guess, looking at the outputs of the athlete in the closest joint angles that you can with the closest velocity that you can for that characteristic of the sport, and sort of you're looking at that compared to, I guess, the kinematics of the movement? Or do you sort of try and get some tests where you're looking at kinematics of their movement by filming them in training and from a biomech point of view as well, looking at how they train and perform?
Yeah, I mean, we've been through that other. Going back a few years, everyone was talking about functional training, functional testing, this, that, and the other. You can't. I had an S&C guy working with some jumpers many years ago who convinced the coaches that doing drop jumps they had to have a contact time of 0.1 of a second, and that's just unachievable to do it properly. So the difference was a lack of understanding on the behalf of the S&C coaches that the reason why a takeoff is 0.1 of a second, or up to 0.18 if you're in the jump phase of a triple jump, the reason why those contact times are so short is because of the horizontal speed. Now, you remove the horizontal speed and you put someone on a 40 centimeter block and say, I want you to do a 0.1 second contact, you ain't going to get a decent contact. So this is where you can use data badly, So establishing norms for a 40 centimeter drop jump, I wouldn't want to see anything more than 0.2 of a second. That is achievable, and still being able to perform at the in the right way. Flat foot contact, not too much collapse, good control. So that's where our reference points come in, and normative data. So that's for me is how you would use numbers well, not to try and replicate something that's not achievable. And if they do get to 0.1 of a second on a 40 centimeter drop jump, they're going to be landing on the toes and not doing much from the ground.
Yeah, not getting high.
Yeah.
That's a perfect scenario there to unpack. And like you said, how you can easily get too complicated sometimes when you're in the thick of things, when things are moving too fast and you're trying to get overly specific, and you lose your principles.
Yeah, I mean, specificity comes in many forms. I mean, I wrote an article with some colleagues at Salford many years ago. We ran some workshops for BASES, the British Association of Sport and Exercise Sciences, on application of biomechanics into S&C. And we wrote an article around movement specificity. What does it mean from a biomechanics point? I think it's in Professional Strength and Conditioning Journal, where we looked at the various qualities that you'd be looking for, and trying to map exercises onto the skill. So you'd be looking at say a long jump, and you say, well, how much horizontal speed would there be? How much vertical speed, rotational speed? Some of it might have zero influence. Like rotational speed in a long jump is not it's not relevant, but horizontal and vertical is. Then you'd look at what would be the typical knee moments, knee power. What are the muscle lengths, i.e. joint angles of muscle, compare each of these qualities, force velocity, whole body speed, size onto that. So we created this little movement specificity framework where you'd be looking at how does a deadlift compare to a long jump, and it might have a movement specificity ratio of about 0.3. Doing a long jump at full speed would be 100%. But it's not about selecting things that are 190% and up. It's about understanding what the attributes you're looking for. Do I want something with stretch shortening cycles? Do I want to overload the quads and the hamstrings in a certain way, or the calf muscles, then that's not to say that they're not important because they've got a low ratio. It's just how and where do you put them into your program. That's the key, I think. So you've got a good solid rationale of where an exercise fits in, and if there's a choice between, doing an isolated movement or doing something, open chain, closed chain, whatever, you can select which one has more merit from a time saving point of view, as much as anything. What would you get more bang for your buck with? What you do is you justify its position in the program based on something rational, and again, that's another way I get a bit of buy-in. If you've got a coach who's adamant this is my go-to exercise, then, well, have you thought about this, because you get this and that from it, and we don't have to do double of it. You don't have to do that and that. We can just do this one exercise. It's maybe a little bit smarter in the way you do things. So, these are good questions to be having with coaches. It helps build that knowledge exchange. It helps build the trust, the relationship. And at the end of the day, we all know coach is king. They go with what they want, but at least you've had that conversation. And, a year or whatever down the line, they might go, you know what, maybe we should try that now. So it's just about being patient, not, trying to run before you can walk, and, gradual steps, but communication, talking about their events, their sport, showing interest. These are just basics of getting some buy-in. You've got to show them that you're actually invested in their sport, as much as they are.
And going back, you mentioned isokinetic testing and how that's something that you really value for the quad hamstring. Do you mind going into a little bit more about that? How that feed into your decision making?
I think, if we go back to, why have I got involved in changing direction stuff? Well, my PhD was in long and triple jump. That is changing direction. It's from horizontal to vertical. Changing direction, ACL injury risk, agility, all this type of stuff is also changing direction on a horizontal platform. But the mechanisms and the body movements are the similar up until the point of contact and the early part of contact, the knee flexion part, absolutely identical. If you want to brake harder, it's the same as how you would prepare for a long jump takeoff. You come in at speed and you brake. Now, what we used to do was measure eccentric quad strength and hamstring strength using Biodex or other LIDO on various isokinetic machines. And they gave us the safest, in my opinion, the safest and most accurate data on eccentric strength of quads and hammies. When we had to move away from universities for testing and moved into high performance centers, they didn't all have isokinetics. So this is where we started looking at how else can we get a measure of leg strength. We used a Concept 2 dyno machine to start with, and then that led to the iso squat when we used portable force plates. So that was how we'd moved from isokinetics, tried something different, reflected on it, moved to iso squat. Mid-thigh pulls were in the equation then, but iso squat became the thing. So where do both sit? Well, we've got normative values. If I'm testing adaptations to training, I'd probably just use the iso squat. If I'm looking at something specific, like quads or hamstrings in relation to performance or injury risk, I'd be testing something very close to the mechanisms of those performance and injuries, eccentrics where the muscle's being stretched. So that's where I would still incorporate isokinetics into my testing protocol, maybe twice a year. know that the best jumpers in the world have got eccentric peak torque relative to body mass of 5.5 body weights for quads and 3 times body weights for eccentric hamstrings. These are my reference figures, and if I can get them up to that, if I can get them up to those values, I know that they should be robust enough to perform the movements well, be it changing direction, ACLs, or running and jumping for distance.
That's a great answer. Appreciate it. Thank you. I think you've just
made.
You go.
I think the point is, you don't rule out any technology. Just because something's a flavor of the month, you don't rule it out. You've got to weigh it up as to what it's actually giving you. What are the attributes you're testing? If I'm looking at injury risk, I test using the mechanism as closest to that injury mechanism as I can. Eccentrics. How am I going to do that safely? Isokinetics. Until something else comes out that gives me that very specific information, I will still use isokinetics. It doesn't stop me from doing no board or iso squats using the force plates, because they're the things I would still use more on an ongoing basis in the gymnasium or the clinic. But isokinetics maybe twice a year. They all have the place.
And you mentioned buy-in and engagement as well with the coaches, and that the importance of showing that you care and that you're passionate about the sport. In terms of, I guess, reporting and conveying your assessments in a format that athletes can understand, as well as technical coaches. What are your tips for sports scientists, biomechanists, S&Cs in doing that effectively?
So just repeat that a sec. Sorry.
With from a buy-in perspective, you talked about the importance of showing that you care. Yeah, but then also conveying your assessments in a format that is easy for technical coaches, athletes to understand. What are some of your favorite ways to, I guess, visualize that data?
I think looking here what I wrote down, we talked about the relationship they're building. I think that the buy-in for me, once you've established that relationship, the buy-in comes from a performance solutions approach. When you've got the trust to have those really deep conversations over a coffee or a beer on a camp, and you just throw it out there. What are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on that? And then when you can come up with a nailed on performance question, and you can then say, well, have you thought about this? You can't say, have you thought about this, until you've got that relationship, because that's seen as antagonistic. Why don't start a question with why? Why do you do this? Have you thought about this? In the past, did you do this? What has brought you to this working? And when you've got that performance question, you can then, which is basically grown between the two of you, the coach and the S&C or the biomechanist. You can then start filling your boots and having a crack at answering it. In whichever way it may come out. It could be just using data. It could be testing. I think that's the other thing, is don't always assume you have to test. Because as I said before, you don't have to test. Use and apply your basics well. Yeah.
Yeah, so that actually brings on a good point with testing. It's probably something we haven't brought in, like what's your stance on how often you test? Is it if there's obviously there needs to be a strong purpose to test the athlete, but is that are you commonly testing the athlete to see changes, to see how they're adapting to the program and changes that need to be made? You mentioned how there's some normative values that you've got. Do you like to see that every few months to sort of see how they're tracking? You sort of talk us through, I guess, the frequency of tests
Yeah.
with that lead
Again,
athlete.
it is about coming up with that testing in a suitable time. So typically we would have a block of anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, and then a recovery week. And within the recovery week, you would do your tests, which are not, going to completely wipe them out. There's still a reduced load within that week, but you're actually getting a fresher athlete after a couple of days recovery. You really are focusing on some quality information again. I wouldn't test for testing's sake. I think if you start putting things into the program because you are data driven, I think that's a problem. I think data is informative when you've got the right timing for it and the right scenarios. I look at the way fatigue monitoring is being administered now in across all codes of football, and I have to say at times I'm bewildered at how or what you're looking for. I did a presentation for the Isokinetics conference last March, and I showed with data from how we test with jumpers at Aspire. We would do a counter movement rebound jump where we're looking at a performance metric of jump height for the counter movement, and then an RSI counter movement on the drop jump side, the reactive jump. And we tested on a Sunday, which is our day one of the week, having had Friday, Saturday recovery weekend. Mm-hmm. And then we'd do 8 sessions and test again on a Thursday lunchtime. So Sunday was warm up, and then they would do some mobility, then they would do a test. And then Thursday, after accumulation of 8 sessions, they would do another jump test, same counter movement reactive jump. From Sunday to Thursday, we would see a 15% drop off in jump height. Now I'm hearing, in the community around the force decks, jump height's not sensitive to fatigue. And I'm like, what? How can it not be? So the question then is, when are you testing? Okay, match day -1, match day -2, match day +2. Are you really expecting differences? Surely the way to be looking at whether an athlete has recovered from a game is to get some nailed on fatigued results. So when you know fully that athlete is totally destroyed, fatigued, that's your benchmark, not match day. I mean, I'm not saying don't do match day -1 and +2. Actually get some good reference data of a truly fatigued athlete, so you know where they're at. Everything else then in the other metrics, force at zero velocity, peak and eccentric velocity, counter movement depth, all these are secondary measures that contribute to that jump height. So if I know that match day +2, they are, up to the threshold of their best performances, then they're not fatigued. No matter if they go deeper into a squat, they're just using more muscular effort. If they go faster and less deep, they're using more elasticity. Is it a strategy? I don't like that term. I don't think athletes, when you say to them, jump as high as you can, I don't think they go, should I go slow and deep or fast and short? I don't think they're doing that. So in terms of a strategy, it implies that they're consciously, deliberately doing it in a certain way. Is the effect of, not a strategy as such. So I mean, maybe that's me being a little bit of being a bit pedantic. One of these pet peeves, I guess. Is there such a thing as a movement strategy, or is it a consequence? And if they are still jumping the same height with the same peak power, are they really fatigued if they spend, zero point 0, however many seconds more, in the concentric phase? I think that's really nitpicking and overcomplicating things, really.
But yeah, on the strategy, or just simply the pattern that the athletes use to jump as high as they can. With Is that something that you take note of? So if they are a little bit more of a hip flexion compared to knee flexion, and what does that mean for you? Like when they do change strategies.
Again, it comes back to testing attributes. So with my jumpers, counter movement into a rebound jump, what am I looking for with jumpers? These are fast, elastic people, and we're looking for this elastic. That we used to call it the ping, like as in elastic band ping. Have you got your ping today? So what we're looking for is someone who can jump relatively fresh week in, week out, and maybe 3 weeks away from competing. So they've got to keep this elastic quality. So I am looking for their ability to react in terms of the RSI relative to the highest jump that they can produce. So that's more of my quality. There's a reactiveness relative to the drop height, essentially. Yeah. Not worrying too much about how they initiated the eccentric phase in the counter movement jump. So again, if you think about qualities, the elasticity rebound effect for me is more important than looking at eccentric peak velocity or depth of movement. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. I think we've unpacked a fair bit there in terms of biomechanics. Yeah. Is there anything like on the topic that you think would be important for listeners? I guess more so the coaches, practitioners, that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, look, I think observations, and again, I apologize if this comes across as being harsh, but please, as an S&C community, and this comes from a biomechanical point of view, can you focus on the C, not just the S? For sure, strength has got its place and is a quality that we want to improve. But for me, the real nugget is in the C. The C is where you're going to get your transfers into performances. If you look at some of the world-class athletes out there, world record holders, they may not have set foot on an Olympic lifting platform. So it's not just about the strength side of it. You've got to look at, how are they building the athlete to meet the demands of their event or their sport. So I guess that's a takeaway, to try and become more biomechanically minded in your approach. And I think then is just that word of caution to the younger coaches who are, I wouldn't necessarily say trying to make a name for yourself. Don't try and complicate things. Keep things simple in terms of the assessment. Focus on your attributes, not the metrics. You don't have to come up with something new. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't become one of these complexifiers. One of the things I was taught early doors working with athletes and coaches way back in the 90s is keep things simple. Don't overcomplicate things. Talk their language. And I think it's not just in the S&C community. I think in the athletics community now, you're getting some people who are using science as a selling tool rather than focusing on actually doing some good conditioning work. So again, apology if that comes across as being too critical, but stick to the conditioning and do things well. Yeah.
I think it doesn't come. I mean, certainly from my end anyway, it doesn't come across that way. It comes across that you're clearly passionate about the field, and you've got you want everyone to be, I guess, well informed in how to do things, and in this industry we can get easily caught up in the next best thing. But I think having that approach, like you said, just take a breath, look at reflect on how you're doing things, how can you be getting better with your processes, and I mean, there's some big rocks that you've discussed. The importance of making sure everyone's talking medically, science, performance team, on the same page before working with the athlete. I mean, what a frustrating experience, like you said, for the athlete to be getting pulled in all different directions. And ultimately, we want to have that athlete-centered approach. So I think that was a really important message for us as an industry to respect. And then, like you said, don't get too caught up in the science when speaking to the athlete. They're probably not going to care too much about that, but have strong science processes and principles in place behind the scenes, I guess, when we're doing our analysis work and planning.
Yeah. I've just seen a question pop here. He said, you thought force lights were bad. Wait until pose estimation apps fully kick in. I don't know who sent that one in, but
no, they haven't got their name there.
Enough,
PSG.
Yeah. I'm involved in a couple more companies now. One is a tech layer in shoe type assessment company called Sports Censure. And then the other one is actually a pose estimation app called NSA Tech. And I think, again, I mean, I see that's written and said with a bit of a joke, but there is a use for these pose estimation apps for sure. If you don't,
what are they? What's the pose estimation app?
So a pose estimation is basically kinematically tracking movement using AI algorithms.
Oh yeah.
So
there are a couple out there.
Yeah, and as I said, I'm working with the NSA Tech, and it's a Qatar company. I've been working with them for a couple of years now, trying to develop a solution for movement tracking. I think some of them work very well, single camera, easy to use, very coach friendly, and will give you some really good information. But again, treat it for what it is. If you're wanting sagittal plane knee angles and the angular velocities, I know that NSA Tech is very favorably with XNs in some change in direction task, which is running, accelerate, decelerate, run backwards. Where you're filming is predominantly single plane, you will get some religion. It goes again, it goes to what are you looking for? What metrics do you want from it? What attributes are you measuring? They can work, they can be useful. So don't dismiss things on the basis that it's not millimeter accurate like a Vicon or a Qualisys. I would argue that being able to test something with your phone camera on a tripod with 4 markers on the ground, wearing football boots on the right surface, far outweighs millimeter accuracy of going with trainers onto a lino type vinyl surface in a lab, just so you can get all marked up to do Qualisys integrated with force plates. Everyone knows, which a lot of biomechanists are based in universities, very expensive labs, million pound labs. It's like, I'm going to have to want to sell that service. But the reality is, it's not environmentally or ecologically valid in terms of footwear and surface. So therefore, what do I want? Some things maybe got accurate, slightly less accurate, but accurate enough information on the field in their environment, or go to an artificial environment which is restricted for space, and you're compromising other things that are, really important. We know that if you try running on ice with a low friction quality, you're not going to get in the same position as wearing spikes on track. So friction force is really important, and making sure it's as close as what you would expect in the real scenario of match play, I think is just as important. That often gets overlooked because of accuracy.
Yeah, that's actually opened up a couple of questions there. So on using AI, your iPhone, to get some feedback, you think there's some merit to it? It's reliable enough to use in a elite sport?
I believe so, and I'm happy to give anyone a demo of the one I've been working on. Not to use this as a sales pitch, but I think
so that's for change of direction. Change of direction, sprinting.
I wouldn't do anything like 90-degree or 180 turns. I would go in and out backwards.
Right.
Where your knee angle is, so you can preserve the knee angle, a sagittal plane knee angle. As soon as you start turning,
rotating, yeah,
the vantage point of the knee angle is going to be wrong. So keeping things sagittal, I think that it can work very well.
But change of direction.
But again, what are you testing? Why do an artificial test on changing direction 90, 180? They change all the time, pre-planned movements. Again, if you try and mimic what goes on in the game, it's unplanned. You want to try and take it to the quality you're looking at, in the sense of changing direction. It's more about eccentric control and how are you braking. So looking at the braking strategy of, did I say strategy then? Looking at how people brake, having accelerated to a velocity to go down to zero velocity, to then come back on themselves, running backwards, I think gives you enough information about, knee angular velocities, will give you an indication of how much the knee is decelerating the body. It's not looking at knee moment, it's not looking at knee power. But let's not forget looking at knee moments and knee powers from inverse dynamics is quite varied as well. So, you don't have to get force plates out to do a change in direction. You can use kinematics, and understanding your technical model allows you then to make inferences about how braking is occurring. So technical models, understanding the purpose of the task, accelerate, decelerate, run back, look at knee angles, knee angular velocities in the context of peak speed that you attain in that. Yeah, it's fascinating.
I was listening to one of your interviews, and I think it was brought up the technical model, how Frank Dick was highly passionate about it at the time. You're British Athletics. When building out a technical model, what are sort of your key principles? Like, so the population, does it need to be population specific to the sport? Talk us through that when you're trying to build out a technical model, perhaps when there's not one in a specific, like, for example, thinking of like AFL. Would you compare an AFL athlete sprinting mechanics to a 100-meter sprinter as a scenario?
Well, I think that there are principles and there are positions which influence how much speed you can generate. So acceleration wise, there shouldn't be any difference. You've got to question then, what is the limiting factor? Is it the traction from the floor through that governs how horizontal and inclined you can go? Is it the fact that you're starting more semi-upright rather than coming out of blocks? It's probably a bit of both. So, you've got to look at what are the fundamental mechanics around acceleration. Some of which is, don't make sure you don't plant your foot in front of your body when you're accelerating, because center mass behind the foot, it's a braking effect. So you want to minimize any braking, but when you're changing direction, you want to maximize braking. So you plant your foot further in front of your body, and you can achieve that by leaning backwards slightly and extending your leg, providing you've got enough friction force so you don't slip. Then you're going to brake harder, providing you've got the eccentric control, muscular control to do that. So again, that's just looking at trunk position and leg position, and I think when you think about your segmental ratios, the trunk accounts for 64%. Let's say everything above the hips is 64% of the body. So your two legs around about 30% each, and everything above the hips around 64%, something like that. So controlling body position is going to have a huge effect on what you're doing. So again, understand the movement. Game-based movements are not as clear cut. If we were to say changing direction in AFL or soccer, it's going to be very much situational constrained. It's not like you've got to run and hit a takeoff board, which is very very focused and specific. So changing direction in games, there could be half a dozen or more different ways: forwards to backwards, forwards 90 degrees, forwards 180, sideways forward, sideways back. There's all these different ways of changing direction, and I think if you understand the acceleration, the deceleration part of it, and what governs high speed and what governs deceleration, then you can then soon map that on the physical qualities as well.
And that's when you've got your video analysis, you might be using AI. You've got your isokinetic testing, like you said, to get understanding of their capacities, that eccentric control. And you sort of marry up the two to then put a plan in place.
For sure, yeah.
What about there you go.
It's the way you're linking the physical development with the injury risk of these types of activities, and being able to be that conduit between different professions and the athlete to try and bring it all together around a technical model that says, if you want to do this quicker and safer, I suggest doing it this way. And we can do technical coaching to develop that, physical coaching to achieve those positions, and also remedial or supplementary training with the physio, to make them more robust. So core control, ankle stability, proprioception, all these other things, all combined to create the full package, really.
I appreciate it. Well, it's been well over an hour, Phil, so mindful of your time. It's late at night, but I think the quality of content that you've been able to provide us, mate, over the last 60 minutes has been amazing. For those that have tuned in halfway through or perhaps at the end live, make sure to listen to the very start. Phil's dropped gems all the way through, so you can find this on our YouTube channel before we post it on our podcast in the next couple of weeks. Mate, for 2024, obviously at the start of the year of this recording, early January, what's on the horizon for you? You mentioned a couple of business opportunities that you're looking at. You're relocated back home. What are you excited about for the rest of the year?
Oh, I would say creativity, innovation, new opportunities, actually getting stuck in with students again, sharing and passing knowledge and to colleagues as well, younger colleagues who may be sort of honed in on the academic mindset rather than the performance solutions mindset. So trying to create more impact, I think, is from an academic point of view. How can we make research more performance solutions focused to make sure that when we are creating an evidence base, that it's quality evidence, not this has been done because it's never been done before. I think as academics, we've got to move away from that and really focus on these real good quality performance questions. That's the thing that's going to drive me forward this next year.
Love it. And for those that want to follow up and maybe have some follow-up questions or just to simply connect and follow your work, is there a best place to find you?
Oh dear, I don't really do all the. LinkedIn. Find me on LinkedIn. Yep. That's probably the best place.
Yeah.
I've not really the grasp of the Twitterati yet, but
yeah, fair enough.
LinkedIn. Let's keep things professional. Let's go LinkedIn.
Yeah. We'll add that tag in the show notes. And you mentioned a couple of business opportunities at the moment. Is there anything people should be following or apps or anything that people should keep an eye out?
Keep an eye on NSA Tech, and as I said, if you and Sports Censure, keep a look out for them. Vald, I'm through and through Vald with Forstex, obviously. So what they're doing there is so impressive at how they've really taken the Forstex on and made it a real global entity now. So keep an eye on Vald. Keep it real, but watch out for Sports Censure and NSA Tech as well. And if anyone wants a free go trial period with NSA Tech, give us a shout.
Okay, NSA Tech. Yeah, we'll add the links in the show notes for those perhaps listening to the recording while driving. Don't sweat. Well, you can find those in the show notes. But yeah, thanks again, Phil. Really appreciate it, and thank you for everyone that's tuned in. And our next live chat, you can catch us next Tuesday, which will be the 9th of Jan at 4 p.m. Interviewing Daniel Jones at the Geelong Football Club. He's a strength and conditioning coach there. So looking forward to seeing you guys all then. Cheers, Phil.
Thanks very much.